I don't think
That's not fair, bro. That's actually not fair. That's not fair at all, man.
Oh my God.
It's done, isn't it?
I do think it's not fair I was voting personally. I'm obviously putting my bias towards people I know. But I don't know you long enough to know what your intentions are.
I feel like a lot of your guys' reasoning was because of Tommy, and then you've all just voted Tommy. That's not fair.
She's right, bro. She's right. She's right.
Nah, I think that's bang out, man.
I stopped.
That's honestly fucked, bro.
That's fucked.
They voted him out, just like that, gone. And every single person in that room knew, deep down, that what just happened wasn't right. You already know what I'm about to say. You felt it watching that vote go down. That tight feeling in your chest when the numbers came in and Chidi's face just dropped. That wasn't reality TV drama. That wasn't entertainment. That was something a lot uglier. That was a group of people deciding that one man should pay for another man's sins, and nobody stopped it. Nobody said enough. They just let it happen and called it done. And look, I need you to stay with me here, because this goes deeper than a vote count. Chidi walked into that elimination conversation doing everything right. Everything. He stood up and said what most people in his position wouldn't have the courage to say. He told them flat out, my name got attached to Tommy's name, and that's not fair. That is not a fair reason to send me home. He wasn't begging. He wasn't spiraling. He was making a case, a real, clear, honest case, that the reasoning being used against him belonged to someone else's story, not his. And here's the thing though, nobody disagreed with him. Not really. Even the people who ended up voting against him admitted it. They said it themselves. The reasons for sending them both home were mostly about Tommy, mostly about Tommy's behaviors, mostly about what Tommy did, what Tommy said, who Tommy hurt. So why did Chidi go home? That's the question nobody in that room wanted to answer out loud. And that's exactly the question we're going to sit with today. Because here's what I've learned watching situations like this play out over and over again. When a group of people has already made up their minds, they don't need good reasons. They just need enough reasons to make it look fair. And that's exactly what happened here. Chidi got caught in the blast radius of someone else's reputation, and the group pulled the trigger anyway. Now, before I get any further into this, let me tell you something about Chidi that the vote itself buried completely. This guy came in as a bombshell, late entry. Everyone else had already built their connections, their inside jokes, their little alliances. He walked into a room full of people who already had their people. And even in that situation, he was getting somewhere. He mentioned Ellie. He mentioned other connections he was starting to build. He specifically said he hadn't even had the chance to speak to all the girls yet. He said that, openly, in front of everyone. And you know what the response was? Basically, you've been here long enough. For a bombshell. Let that sink in. He literally hadn't had time. He said it. And instead of that mattering, instead of someone saying, wait, he makes a fair point, give him a real shot, the conversation just moved on. Because the decision was already made. The reasoning didn't actually matter. It was just noise around a conclusion that was reached before anyone sat down. I want to slow down for a second here. I genuinely do. Because I think about people watching this who have been in situations like Chidi's. Not on a TV show, in life, at work, in friendships, in families, where you did nothing wrong, where your name just got tangled up with someone else's mess, and suddenly you're the one taking the hit. You're the one walking out the door. And everyone around you says, sorry, it's not personal, it's just how it worked out. And you're standing there knowing, absolutely knowing that it wasn't fair. And there's nothing you can do about it. That feeling is real. And watching Chidi go through it on camera, it hits different. Because we've all been there in some version of it. We all know that feeling. And honestly, that part gets to me. It does. I'll admit that. There's something about watching a genuinely decent person get swept out because the crowd needed someone to sacrifice. And he was the easiest option. That's not drama. That's something darker. Okay, let's get back into it. So the vote happens. And here's where it gets interesting. They do this hand raise system, right? Trying to make it feel democratic, trying to make it feel like everyone had equal say. And on paper, maybe it looked that way. But watch what happens underneath the surface of those numbers. Tommy gets 6 votes to stay. 6. The person who, by everyone's own admission, had done things in that house that, quote, a lot of people would argue means he doesn't deserve a place there anymore. Those are their words, not mine. That guy gets 6 votes. Chidi gets 4. Chidi, who nobody had a single bad word to say about personally, who everyone agreed was genuine, who the group itself described as someone who bonded well and deserved a chance. That guy gets 4. Now here's where it gets really uncomfortable. After the vote, one of the girls says, I really thought Tommy was going to go. All of their reasons were because of Tommy. She said that out loud, after the fact, meaning in real time. Even the people voting understood that the logic didn't add up. They voted anyway. And then someone looked Tommy dead in the eye after Chidi walked out and said, you are very lucky to still be here. By the skin of your teeth. By skin off his teeth. So they kept the guy who everyone agreed was lucky to still be there and sent home the guy who everyone agreed deserved a chance. And then they called it done. Decision's done. It's finished, guys. Move on. But here's the part nobody talks about. That snap. That finality. The moment someone said it's done and just shut the whole conversation down before anyone could revisit it. That's not confidence. That's not leadership. That's someone who knew the logic didn't hold up and moved fast before the cracks got too wide. Because if they'd slowed down, if they'd actually let Chidi's argument sit in the air for another 30 seconds, someone would have cracked. Someone would have changed their vote, and they couldn't let that happen. Actually, wait, let me rephrase that. It's not that they couldn't. It's that they chose not to. There's a difference. And that choice matters. Because what we watched wasn't a group of people making a hard decision under difficult circumstances. What we watched was a group of people protecting their own comfort, their own existing connections, their own familiar circles, and then dressing it up as fairness. Chidi called it. He said it himself. He said the vote wasn't fair because people were voting for who they knew, not who deserved it. And one of the people there actually agreed with him. She said she was putting her bias toward people she knew. At least she admitted it. But admission doesn't undo the outcome. Chidi still went home. And Tommy, the guy who started all of this, the guy who was the actual reason the whole elimination situation even existed in the first place, Tommy stayed. Now, here's where it connects to something bigger. Because this isn't just about one vote in one house. This is a pattern. This is how favoritism actually works in closed groups. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't walk in and say, hey, we're going to protect our own and punish the outsider. It hides behind process. It hides behind votes and hand raises and phrases like it's done and that's the decision. It makes itself look fair on the surface because the mechanics look equal. Same vote, same count, same rules for everyone. But the mechanics don't account for who was already trusted before the counting started. And Chidi, as a late arrival, didn't have that trust built. Not yet. He barely had time. And that's the reason for that. Well, you'll see. Or actually, you already see. Because you've been watching this your whole life in one form or another. The system isn't broken. The system is working exactly the way it was designed to work. To protect whoever got there first. Good people are going home every single week. That's what someone said after Chidi walked out the door. Every single week. Like it was a pattern they'd already noticed. Like this wasn't a surprise. Like they'd watched it happen before and expected to watch it happen again. And still nobody did anything differently. That's the part that should keep you up at night. Not just that Chidi was treated unfairly, but that everybody there already knew it was happening, had watched it happen before, and still let the machine roll forward. Because here's what protecting your circle actually costs. Every time a group chooses familiarity over fairness, they lose something real. They lose the person who would have brought something new. The perspective they didn't have. The connection that might have changed the whole dynamic. Chidi himself said it. He said he felt like if he'd had the same amount of time as Tommy, he genuinely could have found his person in there. And someone who knew him agreed. They bonded. They saw potential in him that the vote count erased. But potential doesn't vote, and goodness doesn't vote, and fairness doesn't vote. People vote, and people, when pushed, vote for what they already know. So what are we left with? We're left with a guy who came in clean, played it straight, made honest arguments, and got sent home for another man's reputation. And we're left with a guy who, by his own housemate's admission, was lucky to still be in the building, getting 6 hands raised in his favor. And here's what really gets me. Nobody is angry at the right thing. After Chidi walks out, the conversation snaps back into daily life almost immediately. There's a moment, just a moment, where someone calls it banged up and wrong. But then it settles. The discomfort gets absorbed. And the group moves forward as if the injustice was just a feature of the process, rather than a failure of it. That's how it always goes, isn't it? The outrage is brief. The outcome is permanent. Chidi goes home. Tommy stays. And in 2 days, nobody in that house is going to be talking about whether the vote was fair. They're going to be talking about whatever comes next. Because that's how groups protect themselves from the guilt of what they just did. They bury it in forward motion. But we don't have to do that. We can actually look at it. And what it looks like is this: a young man walked into an unfamiliar environment, tried to build something real, got 0 credit for his genuine approach, and paid the price for someone else's track record. That's not a game mechanic. That's a moral failure dressed up in democratic trappings. So I'll ask you directly, right now. If you had been in that room, would you have raised your hand for Tommy? Knowing what you knew. Knowing that the reasons for the elimination were all on his side of the ledger. Knowing Chidi hadn't done a single thing wrong. Would you have done it? Because 6 people did, and they all watched Chidi hug everyone goodbye and walk out that door. And then they said nothing personal. Tough, isn't it? Nothing personal. That's what we tell ourselves when we choose comfort over conscience. That's the phrase we reach for when we want to do what's easy and still feel like a decent person on the other side of it. And it works for a little while, until someone like Chidi is long gone and you're lying there at night and you actually know what really happened in that room. What really happened in that room. So I want to know what you think. Leave it in the comments. Was this vote justice? Was it favoritism? Was it the system working exactly as it's designed to work for people who already belong and against people who just arrived? Because I think you already know the answer. And I think that answer makes you angrier than you're letting on. Good people going home every single week. All for what?